First of all, I'd just like to say huge thanks to both you, Evan Snow, and Andrew for hosting me on behalf of the Frank C. Ortis Art Gallery as part of your Art Discourse series. It's such an honor to take part and to represent Broward County this way. Just a very, very brief introduction to who I am. My name is Taryn Nicoll, and I received my Master of Fine Arts degree from LSU in Baton Rouge and my BFA with honors from Otis College of Art and Design in Los Angeles. I am the chief curator at the Frank C. Ortis Art Gallery in Pembroke Pines, lovingly known as the Frank. So frequently when you hear about the Frank being discussed, it's just referred to as the Frank, and we love that nickname. In my private and independent curatorial career, I assisted with developing exhibitions at the Beijing Museum of Contemporary Art, the Tata Museum of Modern Art in Tianjin, and the Center for Contemporary Art Afghanistan, to name a few. My work has been featured on PBS Art Loft, CBS Focus on South Florida, the Sun Sentinel Art Hive, and then of course Choose 954 blogs and podcasts. I also have a other life as a fine artist myself, a studio artist. I'm a painter, and I create medically inspired art, tracking the journeys of people who are recovering from various medical conditions, physiological experiences. And my work has been exhibited at LACMA in LA, Johns Hopkins Welch Medical Library, the New Orleans Pharmacy Museum, and several more. And I'm a frequent contributor and panelist for the Cultural Institution Program, the Regional Investment Panel, and the Public Art Selection Panel for Broward County Cultural Division. That is one of my paintings to the left. Before we dive into today's presentation, I just want to encourage everyone to check out what the Frank is doing online. We are still closed to the public, but our beautiful gallery is beautifully represented via amazing virtual exhibitions that completely redefine that category of exhibition mode. And we also have a virtual classroom. All of these are visible on our landing page. If you go to our website at www.thefrankgallery.org, ignore that says org, and at the Frank Pembroke Pines on social media. So today we're going to discuss a beloved topic, but from a very different angle. We're going to talk about the power of art, but not as you know it. Whether you're an artist, an art lover, or an advocate for the arts, when the topic of the power of art comes up, it likely fills you with joy, right? Because that's what we all consider the power of art to be. The transmission of joy, a platform for communication and free expression, the ability to express and emote and teach and unify with the most genuine, raw, authentic of intentions, right? The power of art is typically thought of from the perspective of the artist, who harnesses that power to create profound and honest works, as well as from the perspective of the trusting viewer, who beholds these pieces and is very, very eager for the education and moments of transcendence that they surely promise. The power of art is often considered to be dismissed or disregarded by decision makers in our societies. And we often hear very earnest complaints that the arts are just not understood or appreciated by the government, by municipalities, and by lawmakers. So that brings me to this question, which is the power of art acknowledged by governments and legislators? The power of art is always known by those in power. These are the people, the invisible architects per se, who work in that gap between the artist and the viewer. They're sculptors of the inferred message. These individuals and entities intuitively understand the power of the arts and are able to identify which works, media, and artists will convey the right message at the right time to the right audience. This, my friends, is the fine art of social seduction. So I want to talk about what we're going to cover today, because there are a few things that are important for me to get out of the way first. So we will look at examples of how art has been utilized to achieve specific ends. So that is art as political symbol, art as social conduit, art as propaganda, and art as a tool of public relations. My aim in this discussion is not to give you a list of every instance in which art has been generated as an obvious propagandistic ploy. Instead, my hope is to give you a behind the scenes, intimate look at just how detailed certain uses of art to unite or to instigate action can be. And even more than that, I really hope to inspire you. To those of you who think that culture advancing abilities of art go unseen by those at the very top, please let me reassure you that the power of art is and always has been absolutely recognized by all leaders throughout history. Sometimes art has been mobilized for the good, sometimes for the bad, and sometimes in those dubious gray areas oscillating between the two. In some cases, you will see art being manipulated, corrupted, its boundless capacity to influence taken advantage of, but art is also used to transform, to protect, to make singular and significant political and social statements. So we're going to start with the idea of the public art museum, and we're going to use a famous example, which you can see to the right. Often, even the building you are standing in uses art to send you a message about its history, its governing entities, or its cultural status. We're going to trace that idea of the invisible architect that I used earlier back to the French Revolution and its transformation of the Louvre Palace into a new national museum. Now, as early as the 18th century, the presence of a public art museum was perceived as a proof of the integrity, dignity, and generosity extended from a state to its people. Thus, a top priority for the French revolutionary government was the dramatic conversion of the former royal palace into the Museum of the French Republic. This transformation was in and of itself an undeniable symbol for the demise of the old regime and the birth of the new Republican state, a chapter in history and a new order. Once a palace reserved for royalty only, the Louvre would now be known as a public museum for the people, accessible by all at no charge. What was once a grand reception hall became the Apollo Gallery, and etched over its entrance are the words from the French Revolutionary Decree that announced the opening of the museum on August 10th, 1793, in commemoration of the anniversary of the fall of the tyranny. So what that really means is that every visitor passing under this public emblem recognizes that this message is the collective subject of all of the art within each gallery that they are about to encounter. So you'll see a couple of my slides will explain what the symbol is and then what the message is. So what the recipient is reading through that, whether they realize it or not. Here's another interesting message that's being sent by the architecture of the Louvre. Now that message engraved on the walls of the Louvre is not the only symbolic device at play in the architecture of that museum. In the book Exhibiting Cultures, author and art historian Carol Duncan noted the Louvre's chosen display convention of organizing works of art by national school, each of which contained the groupings of great masters. Now we do know this from visiting museums, from taking art history classes, that we follow this chronological program, right? Where you see the various developments of art. One movement makes a statement, the next movement responds to it or breaks it down. But the Louvre is responsible for the foundation of that. So what we need to realize though, is that via this display methodology that would eventually be adopted by art museums worldwide, the Louvre could then selectively tell the story of new art history to its public. What do I mean by new art history? What I mean is this: the new art historical curriculum is actually proclaimed in the ceiling of the Rotunda of Mars, which is located in the vestibule depicted here of the Musée Napoleon. Embedded in the ceiling are 4 medallions, each portraying a sculptural work that represents a national school. In Exhibiting Cultures, Duncan explains that these medallions represent Egypt with a cult statue, Greece with the Apollo Belvedere, Michelangelo's Moses representing Italy, and then the 4th and final term is France's Milo of Crotona. Duncan goes on to say that the message here reads very, very clearly: France is the fourth and final term in a narrative sequence that comprises the greatest moments in art history. Simultaneously, the history of art has become no less than the history of the highest achievements of the Western civilization itself. This is a programmed sequence of collections that maintains the 19th century bias for the great epochs of civilization. So what I love about this is that this is embedded, these symbols, these uses of art are embedded in the actual, substance and stuff of the building itself. And these are sending all kinds of messages to everyone who enters the building, not only about what the museum stands for, but what France is. And they could construct that themselves. So at this point, you might be thinking, okay, that's all very interesting, but wouldn't you expect art institutions and museums to make use of the power of art, since that is their domain? I mean, should they not be promoting themselves? And that would be a fair point. Perhaps it's not wholly surprising to learn that through their collections and their architecture, museums can and do convey specific messages about their state's artistic, cultural, and intellectual achievements, as well as their self-identified global rankings. But what about governmental leaders, public relations firms, major corporations? Do they recognize the power of art? So we're going to start here with a very limited survey of glaring examples of how these powerful entities have not only recognized the importance of art and its far-reaching effects, but how they have deployed it as well. First, we're going to look at art as propaganda. And I think that that would be the obvious assumption that that's what this lecture is about. So the social seduction of art, art as propaganda, the two seem very connected. And in this case, for this section of the lecture, they are. Propaganda is strongly associated with totalitarian regimes of dictators such as Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, each of whom knew that the circulation of specific forms of art was essential to their success. The efficacy of propaganda at this time is owed in large part to the advancements of multimedia, communications, and mass media that grew in direct correlation with the global crises of the 20th century. These platforms allowed for strategic images and symbols to be mass-produced and disseminated at an unprecedented rate, which in turn allowed the ideals and ideologies of these regimes to be repeatedly and widely circulated at much lower costs. Now, this mention of repetition is important. Totalitarian propaganda art was often watered down. It was patronizing and sometimes artistically weak because the art itself was secondary to the persuasion taking place. However, the overwhelming repetition of propaganda images in visual arts, music, and film, combined with an ever-waning presence of a counter-artistic movement to challenge it, that repetition with no challenger resulted in a passive acceptance among the population. It was perceived as truth because no one disagreed. And for the sake of time, I'm mainly going to focus on Soviet Russia, and I'm not going to dive too much into Nazi Germany and other totalitarian regimes, although the disciplinary constraints and allegorical goals of the fascist propaganda art at that time are more or less the same between regimes. So immediately preceding and following the 1917 Russian Revolution, a swell of avant-garde Russian art rushed into the international spotlight. Canon-defying movements such as Russian futurism and constructivism were founded by artists such as Malevich and Rodchenko. However, at the end of the Russian Civil War and in the early 1920s, the avant-garde was flagged as being experimental, individualistic, and nonconformist, a challenge to authority. Modern art received increasing public criticism for being elitist and incomprehensible, and control of creative freedom ensued. Now, from its formal induction via state policy in 1934 to the mid-1980s, the only approved and sanctioned form of painting and literature in Russia was socialist realism. Imposed by Stalin, socialist realism featured these artificial, manufactured, highly optimistic scenes that glorified conformity, encouraged total support of the Soviet cause, and promoted the noble nature of the persevering everyday worker who would be able to overcome all odds, no matter how great. And this everyday worker was frequently referred to as the proletariat. And another thing that I want to bring to your attention is that the name of this style is purposefully misleading. It is not related to the truthful confrontational scenes brought forth by the European style of realism that had begun 100 years prior. While socialist realist paintings were rendered in a representational style, they did not present life as it actually was at the time. Rather, artists were to portray positive scenes of life under communism, depicting good Soviet role models that kept the facade of equality intact. So in the form of socialist realism, art was acknowledged to be a powerful weapon that could force false scenes of peace and prosperity onto its public and keep the masses sedate and restrained. As we close out this section, I will mention just a little bit about the National Socialist artwork of Nazi Germany, but only just to stress how seriously art was taken by the leaders of that movement. And then we're going to quickly move on. So Adolf Hitler and his administration had a preference for neoclassical figurative sculptures and very romantic idealized paintings of peasant life. They too rejected the free will and rebellion that was represented by modernism. Modern art was labeled degenerate art and was traveled around in hugely publicized defamatory exhibitions in which crowds were encouraged to jeer and actually destroy the artwork on display. And this was then followed by devastating persecution of modern artists throughout Europe. But the phrase that I want to leave you with is this, is that, Hitler placed an enormous emphasis on the importance of art and culture in the building of his fascist empire. And he made statements such as, Germany is not only to be resurrected politically and scientifically, but primarily culturally. And he believed that the cultural sphere would acquire even more importance than the other two spheres. She was responding to, via an essay, she was responding to photographs of Southern Sudan Nuba people by a Nazi propagandist and filmmaker, Leni Riefenstahl, entitled Fascinating Fascism. And she described propaganda art as follows. Fascist aesthetics flow from and justify a preoccupation with situations of control, submissive behaviors, extravagant effort, and the endurance of pain. They endorse two seemingly opposite states, egomania and servitude. The fascist dramaturgy centers on the orgiastic transactions between mighty forces and their puppets, uniformly garbed and shown in ever-swelling numbers. Fascist art glorifies surrender, it exalts mindlessness, and it glamorizes death. So on to our next step, which is the United States. Something that was happening, especially during the Cold War at the time, is communist and socialist states such as Russia were perpetuating this message that they were the upper echelon of creative production and sophistication and culture, whereas anything that came out of the West was just forgettable. There was no relevance that was coming out of the West at all. So that brings us to our question, which is, outside of this famous Uncle Sam recruitment graphic, has the United States ever participated in large-scale efforts to inform and sway audiences through the use of art? We're going to travel right back to that time of the Cold War to find out. So in 1941, a Central Press wire story identified the Museum of Modern Art, or we'll refer to it from here on as the MoMA, in New York City as the latest and strangest recruit in Uncle Sam's defense lineup. This is because during the Cold War, the CIA and the MoMA worked hand in hand to produce cultural projects and persuasive traveling exhibitions that presented the advantages of life under capitalism to the world. As stated by Eva Cockcroft in her essay, Abstract Expressionism, Weapon of the Cold War, the CIA utilized abstract expressionism in its mission to influence the foreign intellectual community and to present a strong propaganda image of the United States as a free society, as opposed to the regimented communist bloc. So what would be a better style through which to communicate this argument than abstract expressionism? It was free from restrictions, it was bold and experimental, an avant-garde American original with an unbridled attitude, apparently celebrated and encouraged by American leadership. Not only did abstract expressionism render the United States as culturally relevant as Paris, it stood as the visual and stylistic opposite to the restrained orderliness of Soviet and socialist realism. I had to throw this quote in here because I absolutely love it and I think that it is so true. So in a feat of absolutely spectacular wordsmithing, Eva Cockcroft's statements perfectly sum up the relationship between why those in power and the prominent artistic styles of the time go hand in hand. So to understand why a particular art movement becomes successful under a given set of historical circumstances requires an examination of the specifics of patronage and the ideological needs of the powerful. Examination of the rising success of abstract expressionism in America after World War II therefore entails consideration of the role of the leading museum of contemporary art at the time, the Museum of Modern Art, and the ideological needs of its officers during a period of virulent anti-communism and an intensifying Cold War. So who were the officers of MoMA at the time? We're going to take a look at just how closely the CIA and the MoMA were connected throughout the Cold War. American Cold War politics were largely impacted by the expansions of banks and corporations, and with Chase Manhattan Bank at the center of the Rockefeller empire, the Rockefellers directly shaped the evolution of these political strategies and tactics. So MoMA was founded in 1929, primarily by Mrs. John D. Rockefeller. And in 1939, Nelson Rockefeller became MoMA's president. In 1940, he became president of Roosevelt's coordinator. Sorry, in 1940, he became Roosevelt's coordinator of the Office of Inter-American Affairs, and then returned to MoMA's presidency in 1946. Our second person on the list there, John Hay Whitney, was the chairman of MoMA's Board of Trustees. And he worked for the precursor of the CIA, which was the Office of Strategic Services throughout the war years. He is quoted on how the MoMA functioned as a political tool, in his own words, to educate, inspire, and strengthen the hearts and wills of free men in defense of their own freedom. Our third person on the list there, René de Hardencourt, was the head of art for Nelson Rockefeller's Office of Inter-American Affairs, and he became MoMA's vice president of foreign activities in 1944, and then MoMA's director in 1949. Another powerful staff member from the Office of Inter-American Affairs, Porter A. McCrae, he worked as MoMA's director of circulating exhibits after the war. In 1952, he became director of MoMA's international program, and under McCrae's leadership, this program traveled exhibitions of contemporary American art, specifically the abstract expressionists, to London, Paris, Tokyo, and the Venice Biennale. Our final example here, Thomas W. Braden, he was MoMA's executive secretary prior to becoming the CIA's supervisor of cultural activities, which would go on to fund exhibitions and tours around the world, including a 1952 Paris tour of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. In McCrae's words, the Boston Symphony Orchestra won more acclaim for the US in Paris than Dwight Eisenhower could have bought with 100 speeches. So this particular topic sometimes is the subject of much criticism and skepticism. It must be said that the success of abstract expressionism abstract expressionists did not solely lie in this effort. They were successful in and of their own right. And there are a lot of textbooks that claim that the subject has received too much focus and that it's sort of a myopic representation of a very important style of art, and that this is a distraction. But I do want to point out that as much as this could be called a political subversion of an artistic style that flowered out of freedom, formalist ideals, that really wasn't concerned with politics in and of itself, it should still be noted that the artists who were promoted in these traveling exhibitions, they were never commissioned by the state. There were never constraints set for them as to what their works had to be. They never had to follow any, prescribed rules or regulations that were given to them by the US government. And we're going to move from this example of how the US mobilized the power of art to send political messages to the world beyond its borders to this idea. Are there any messages being sent to the US from the outside in? Do foreign nations enlist the power of art to reach American audiences? And if so, how do they enlist art to do this? The best example of this in my mind is the idea of the blockbuster National Cultural Festival. Most of us have been to one or revisited an exhibition that was a component of one of these festivals. I've given you a list of all of these, of several really, really prominent mega festivals and exhibitions that came to the US, but look how many of them came just within 25 years. We have the Treasures of Tutankhamun, 5,000 years of Korean art, the Treasures of the Kremlin, there are a lot of treasures here, but that was a theme for a long time. The Treasures of Ancient Nigeria, the Festival of India, Turkey, the Continuing Magnificence, and the Festival of Indonesia, and Mexico, a work of art. So the traits among these festivals are uniform. They are upbeat, positive, they celebrate the visual arts, music, dance, and literature of a nation. They often include lectures, theatrical productions, films, retail collaborations, and appearances by national leaders. However, many of these festivals do emphasize commonly associated themes and stereotypes that we typically have in place for each nation. Think of how neutral many of these events are, and how often you leave with your exotic fantasies and broad stereotypes being indulged, having received a souvenir keychain version of that featured nation, but without much information on the actual current political, economical, and social conditions experienced by the citizens of that nation, or an analysis of these conditions by their contemporary artists. Why is that? Well, one of my favorite sources for this topic is an exceptional essay entitled Selling Nations: International Exhibitions and Cultural Diplomacy by art historian Brian Wallace. Wallace explains that the Natural Cultural Festival is an effective mechanism by which foreign nations can construct a palatable national identity specifically designed to be consumed by American audiences. So these festivals are created to promote and sell a very specific image of that nation in the United States. And this quote represents his summation of what the motivations driving these festivals are. They should typically be appearing devoid of politics, but their unabashed purpose, in Wallace's words, is to transform negative stereotypes into positive ones, and in the process, to improve the political and economic standing of their country. These exhibitions are multi-layered engines of global diplomacy, which, when staged properly, are almost indiscernible as self-promotions. We're going to look at how the governments of foreign nations have worked with different firms and how they've utilized various techniques to make sure that this happens, or to try their hardest. So in 1985, the government of Turkey hired Washington public relations firm Gray and Company to convert their national image from that of civil unrest, Armenian genocide, and human rights violations to one of promising US trade partner for an annual fee of $600,000, Robert Gray and his team would use PR tactics, such as the year-long festival, Turkey, the Continuing Magnificence, to replace negative stereotypes of Turkey and instead have positive references to, amazing artistic heritage and rich cultural traditions. Our second bullet here refers to the Festival of India. So the Festival of India had a price tag of $15 million, was comprised of over 100 exhibitions across 38 museums in 37 different states, including a large-scale exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum entitled India, Art and Culture from 1300 to 1900. This festival was primarily organized by Ted M.G. Tannen, as you can see there. He is now the owner of the firm Tannen and Associates, which produces national cultural festivals. According to Tannen, cultural festivals promise a more positive image in the United States and encourage tourism and build up new markets for their products. Moving to our third point there, although political overtones are not intended to be a visible focus of any successful national cultural festival, their founders and sponsors are often surprisingly candid about their goals. So when asked about the significance of the major 1990 festival, Mexico, a work of art, Ambassador Lozoya, the head of Mexico's Foreign Affairs Office, stated, and this is quoted in a newspaper article, "Our feeling is that many people don't know who we are, that they have an oversimplified and negative stereotype of Mexico. It is time to change in Mexico. It is a time of change in Mexico and in the relations between our two nations." One of the festival sponsors, George W. Landau, who was at that time the president of the American Society in Manhattan, in the same newspaper article, stated the festival's goals. He said, "The timing is important because it parallels Mexico's request for a free trade agreement and its wish for closer connection with the United States as an equal partner." And the final thing we're going to touch on here is this intriguing word called self-orientalizing. So in order to gain the approval of these very, very broad American audiences, national cultural festivals often appeal to and present entrenched stereotypes that work hard to not challenge the viewer's preconceived assumptions about that country. So drawing from Edward Said's essays, this is similar to the concept of Orientalism, which is a contorted perception of the East based on indicators and signs of foreignness that are derived from Western projections of fear. To keep US audiences comfortable and entertained, these national festivals often self-orientalize, which means that they impose upon themselves the same stereotypes and stunted representations that their oppressors would have previously forced upon them. So at this point, I may have thoroughly depressed everyone watching, made you all very disillusioned with these less than innocent accounts of how art is often used for political purposes. And to alleviate this burden, I just want to reflect a little bit on how artists, art advocates, and researchers respond to instances like the ones that I just mentioned. So just as we discussed, national cultural festivals frequently mask the serious contemporary issues faced by the countries that they represent, and instead synthesize a fictional, homogeneous image of total unity, the synthesis of which often requires the omission of historical facts, entire races and ethnicities, and religious clashes. The Festival of Indonesia hosted 3 massive exhibitions, close to 100 corresponding events, and yet did not reveal its true state of current affairs. This includes human rights abuses in East Timor, devastating destruction of Indonesian rainforests, shocking labor practices throughout the nation, and government-mandated censorship imposed upon contemporary artists. In response to this, the Social Sciences Foundation launched a concurrent, independent program of events, lectures, and discussions that would focus on and encourage dialogue on these really sobering realities. With a $100,000 grant from the Ford Foundation, which makes me really interested into what the Ford Foundation was thinking about and aspiring towards at that time. This bold national series included a feminist conference on women's rights in Indonesia, which took place in Seattle, a lecture on Indonesia's deforestation crisis, which occurred in the New York Botanical Garden, and a conference on the role of the Indonesian Chinese in Indonesian life, which took place at Cornell University. Through this action, a propagandistic utopian national image was upended by artists, scholars, and researchers, so as to return focus to the real experiences of Indonesian citizens at that time. Another topic that we discussed today was that of the propagandistic work produced by Stalin's totalitarian Soviet regime. In contrast to the coerced, regulated art of socialist realism, we will look at what is probably the 20th century's greatest work of counter-propaganda, Pablo Picasso's mural-sized painting, Guernica. That's what you see in front of you right here. Commissioned by the Spanish Republic and the Popular Front government for the Spanish Pavilion at the 1937 Paris World's Fair, this painting was exhibited alongside avant-garde works by Calder, Miro, Gonzalez, and many other important artists at the time. So this painting represents, in response to one incident, the deadly Nazi German and Italian bombing of the Basque city Guernica. However, it soon became to symbolize victims of widespread fascist terrorism globally. So it was not just regarding that one incident, or that's not what it represents to viewers today. It was a very decisive political statement rendered via abstraction. And one of the key differences between Picasso's admitted propaganda painting and that of fascist works is that it unapologetically presents and sympathizes with the victims of the cruel 1937 raid. It's often not what you see in Soviet works or in socialist realism works. There's very little empathy to give because all of the subjects appear very satisfied, very well taken care of. There's very little emotion at play there. Picasso was also very candid about the fact that this was a work of propaganda and that he created it as such. And he's quoted as saying, "In Guernica, I clearly express my abhorrence of the military cost, which has sunk Spain in an ocean of pain and death." So where do we go from here? I really want to stress that the sanctity of the power of art is best protected by the artists themselves. We will always have art advocates and amazing curators and arts administrators and funders and backers, but it really starts with the artists and with the creatives. So we need more artists on governing boards of museums. We need more artists contributing, to media via arts writing and criticism. We need to become educated about the current tax system and regulations regarding charitable deduction write-offs. They sound very positive. They are not always. Always research new laws prior to voting. Continue your art education by reading art history and art theory texts. And just a little note to always do your research about the donors who are funding your exhibitions, and being brave enough to decline inclusion in certain shows if unethical corporations or companies are event sponsors. This happened in 2014 with the Australian Biennale. Several of the artists, a huge number of artists actually realized that one of the event sponsors for the Biennale was involved in the support and funding of Australia's detention centers. And a huge number and other sponsors actually withdrew their participation so as to symbolize their rejection of unethical practices. So they didn't sell their souls for the exhibition opportunity. They were brave enough to stand up and vote with their feet and walk. I just want to say thank you again to Choose 954 and Art and Design Week Fort Lauderdale for hosting my talk here today. And I do encourage everyone to please visit the Frank Gallery at www.thefrankgallery.org. You can find us on Instagram at the Frank Pembroke Pines, and on Facebook, spelled just as you see it, at the Frank Pembroke Pines. Evan, do we have time just for a little 30-second video on,
yes, please.
on the Frank?
Go, okay. Oh, of course, go ahead.
Okay, perfect.
While that loads, Dana Kleinman said, "I learned a lot and so much more that I want to dig deeper into. Thank you, Taryn."
Good, I'm so glad. I'm thrilled to hear that. I think it's always really great to hear about how the arts are actually instigating change. And we always think of change as being positive, but I think it's really, it's important to know, both sides of that coin, because art is so incredibly powerful. And it challenges us to kind of break out of this very, again, like stereotypical mold in our way of thinking about art, and think about it from a more critical light. Founded by the Frank C. Ortis Art Gallery and the City of Pembroke Pines, Frank Contemporaries is a pop-up exhibition dedicated to promoting emerging artists and creative community resources, an event that offers artists, students, and industry insiders the opportunity to present their work, discover new peers and supporters, and foster professional connections. From artists, writers, curators, and art students to those who work in galleries, auction houses, and museums, people from all cultural sectors are welcome. Located at the Charles F. Dodge City Center in the heart of Pembroke Pines, the Frank is a two-story art gallery named after Mayor Frank C. Ortis for his decades-long commitment to the cultural arts. Lovingly known as the Frank, this contemporary art gallery showcases the works of regional, national, and international artists in a robust exhibition program complemented by workshops and lectures that support social engagement and artistic innovation.
Fascinating. And I did not know that Nelson Rockefeller was the president of MoMA. Very insightful. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a very good suggestion or idea that I really hadn't considered being involved on the museum's board or getting involved at that level. But as we do need more involvement, maybe that type of exposure could, entice some engagement or new participation in the arts. So I'm gonna consider that. Appreciate you bringing that to mind.
Of course. I hope that you do. I think that the idea of the board is often perceived as being something that's very, very exclusive, but more and more artists and creatives are getting involved, and they're trying to represent both themselves and each other and their communities in more official capacities. So, with that comes having to attend meetings and serve in other ways, but it means that you're really taking more, you're making sure that like power and change is really that it occurs in the right way. So
amen.
Yeah.
If there's ever a spot on the board of the Frank, consider me. We do have a question. Somebody would like to know if you could share more potentially where they can read about the CIA abstract expressionism connection, or if you could potentially even post biblio sources for them to look up after the fact.
Absolutely, I can share all of my sources. They are, I'll share my sources, and then a number of additional readings. Whole books, I think it can be really great, especially now during this time where, we're still dealing with the pandemic. I think it can be really nice to sit down for half an hour and read like a critical essay on the topic. So I'll be sure to share those resources.
Lovely. Another person asks, what do we have to look forward to from the Frank in 2021?
Absolutely. Our next exhibition, actually, so currently up on the Frank's website, you can access our virtual exhibition called Biological Futurism. We did take a completely, different approach to the very concept of a virtual exhibition, and you can read more about this on, the Choose 954 blog. I posted, some of my thought process and the things that we were prioritizing through the build out of this exhibition there. I'm sure that Evan can share the link to that. But Biological Futurism, it really investigates, it presents an immersive world that's inspired by the adaptive capabilities of nature and scientific illustration. So we have, local artists from South Florida represented. We have artists from San Francisco. We even have artists from London. So I definitely encourage all of you to go and check that out. It runs until January 30th. However, it will remain on our website. It'll be logged under past exhibitions. So, definitely go check it out now if you can. And if you can't, you can definitely go through our archives. Our next exhibition opening on February 18th is Bits and Pieces. It looks at the tactile haptic experience of just viewing collages. And, I'm talking about collage in terms of method and in terms of the layering and juxtapositioning of different ideas, styles, concepts, and media. So we've got an extraordinary lineup of artists for that. We have Jason Aponte, we have Jonathan Ryan Harvey, just incredible artists who are looking at how we can communicate that tactile experience and kind of break apart the layers of a collage through a virtual platform. So that is opening on February 18th. And we're really excited about that. The Frank is still closed to the public at this time, and we are aiming to reopen at about the mid-year mark. So I know I'll be sharing all of that information with Evan and Andrew at Choose 954, and we'll be partnering on letting everybody know when that will be. So in the meantime, be sure to view our website and engage with all of our virtual exhibitions. We also have a virtual classroom, which lets you access all kinds of free lectures, video workshops, art and craft making tutorials, various podcasts with curators around South Florida, and virtual events. So we have 2 virtual Frank Contemporaries, which is a pop-up art exhibition. And we also have a artist tour as well as a virtual dance experience. No sign up required, and it's all free to the public, as always with the Frank.
Phenomenal, because the Frank and Pembroke Pines prioritized and felt it was important to support the arts and make the arts accessible to all. And we're forever grateful for the contribution from the mayor, as well as those that came before us. Robin Vegas worked long and hard for many years as the cultural coordinator for the city. Holly as well has worked very hard for many years with the city. Taryn and her predecessor, Josh, as well, made many great contributions, and everybody else along the way that has created and fostered a really innovative part of Broward County, especially in the suburban area of Western Broward County, where Pembroke Pines is located, to be able to provide a world-class venue for the community to be able to enjoy, especially making it available for free, is phenomenal. I would just ask if you could maybe just share your take on what the Frank Contemporaries has actually done for local artists in the community in terms of giving them an opportunity, a platform, and how that can be impactful for an emerging or even established artist career and progression.
Absolutely. We have had many emerging and mid-career established artists present at our pop-up exhibition series called Frank Contemporaries. Frank Contemporaries has been, it's one of our longest running events. And, prior to the COVID shutdowns, Frank Contemporaries took place once a month. And what it was an event that encouraged art professionals, curators, writers, art students, art enthusiasts, and artists to get together. We provided hors d'oeuvres and appetizers, come get a glass of wine or a bottle of water. And we provided a platform for people from the community to come in at no cost and really be exposed to the most exciting and promising South Florida artists, without having to drive an hour south or north to see that. And then what we do for artists with these opportunities is we provide them a one-night opportunity to share their work. It is a pop-up, so we set their work up, we curate their exhibitions, on the same day that we take them down. But typically when you have an art exhibition opening, there's so many people there, and it's really hard to have intimate personal discussions about what it is that you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to do, and to get genuine feedback. And at Frank Contemporaries, the entire audience, every single guest who's there, becomes the audience of each artist. Typically it's 3 to 4 artists a night, and they each are allowed to address the entire audience, receive all of their attention, focus, and critical good thoughts, and talk about what it is that they're trying to do. So through that, they're able to really forge connections, connect with people who are like-minded and are concerned with similar things. They're able to get direct, genuine feedback from a really, really broad number of people, or a large number of people. And I think that this is a rare opportunity. Beyond that, what Frank Contemporaries does for us as the curatorial team is it allows us to see not only the artist's artwork in person, which is really important because the Frank does not ever review in-person portfolios. We have a digital review process. So Frank Contemporaries puts your work as a featured artist right in front of, myself and the administration team here to actually see in person. And we get to see, which artists are, the most professional, the most responsible, the most communicative, the most hungry for success, who's going to be a great partner to work with for our future exhibitions, and who would we recommend to other professionals looking for artists to include in their exhibitions in this area.
And it really has helped launch and spurn many artists, either careers or trajectories. I remember discovering Narissa Ballin there and working with her later on. And we were grateful for the opportunities that you've provided us to curate and guest curate and collaborate on featuring local artists. So we definitely appreciate that. We appreciate everything that you've done in support of us, from contributing editorially to the hosting to just continuing the events, continuing leveraging your platform. Taryn's very modest and humble, but she's quite accomplished and educated with experience in other major metro markets where she lived previously. And it's really been a joy and a treat to have her here in Broward County. And to have her participate in the art scene has been a blessing. So we're forever grateful and appreciative for you, Taryn, and everybody else at the Frank as well. And we appreciate you taking the time today to share with us. Where, if they want to find you on social media or connect with you via email, how could they do so?
Definitely, feel free to email me. I do monitor the Frank's general email address, which is thefrank@ppines.com. You can also reach me via my direct email address, which is T for Tommy, N for Nancy, T Nicoll @ppines.com. I'm personally fairly quiet on social media, but our our social media for the Frank is really, really happening. And we're always sure to, to respond to our direct messages and comments and any communications that we receive there. So I'm always on that social media platform, and you can reach me that way too. Thank you so much, Evan. I truly appreciate what you and Andrew and the whole team at Choose 954 are doing for Broward County. It's one thing to have many, different individuals creating art, but I think it takes a lot more to really build up an infrastructure through which they can all succeed. And that's definitely what you and Andrew are doing through Choose 954. So thank you for what you do for this area, for always being huge supporters of the Frank in Pembroke Pines, and just for having such a genuine heart for the creative arts in this area. I'm so glad that you are here and that you guys are doing the kind of work that you do, and you're just such a irreplaceable asset to this whole area. So thank you so much.
Phenomenal. We were going to ask you for a testimonial, but I think that was it right there. So we appreciate that. It's a joy. The last thing I would say in closing, this week, while it is Fort Lauderdale Art and Design Week, it really is greater Fort Lauderdale and Broward County Art and Design Week. And we're so glad to support the places that maybe not everybody has ventured out and discovered and enjoyed, like the Wiener Museum of Decorative Arts in Dania Beach, or the Pompano Beach Cultural Center, or things that are happening at the Coral Springs Museum, or the Frank in Pembroke Pines, or Studio 18 in Pembroke Pines. There is so much going on throughout Broward County, and hopefully this week, the Choose 954 social movement, the Zero Empty Spaces initiative, and all of the other things that we're trying to put forward to cultivate culture and community, to make this a better place to live and not just a better place to vacation, will succeed in the goals that we set out, just to move the needle forward. And as evidenced by us having international artists tune in to view your talk right now, I think we're succeeding in doing that. So thank you for your participation. Thank you everybody for tuning in. And we look forward to having you join us for the next one. Cheers.